We are citizens of the universe. Paul Kurtz of Free Inquiry. Joanne mentioned going up to see our new grandson, Miles Henry Gulley, now 26 days old. If he had been born in China, he would be almost 10 months old, since infants born there are dated from the date of conception, not the date of birth, which I find fascinating and logical. I like that tradition of counting in utero time, given my belief that we are always experience some form of in utero, some stage of development preparing us for what comes next in life, a necessary step to be taken. So we need to count in utero. So actually my grandson is now 10 months old, almost. He was in his womb, mother's womb, for 9 months, which must have been amazing, though he lacks the ability to tell us. I once met a man, though, who told me he remembered being inside his mother's womb. He told me this, and I grew very excited because I had been studying about a human phenomena called hyperthymesia, which is the ability to recall with great accuracy and detail personal events or experiences and their associated dates. Some people with hyperthymesia can even remember womb-like experiences and the moment of their birth. And when he described this to me, I was so excited. I thought to myself, I have finally met someone with hyperthymesia. And we kept on talking, and then he told me he had also seen Bigfoot while camping at McCormick's Creek State Park, and that's when I realized he was just wacko. But I was still intrigued with the idea, and I asked him, what was it like inside your mother's womb? And he said, well, it was dark and warm and peaceful. And then I came out, and it was glaring and noisy, and people were laughing and shouting, and I wanted to go back inside my mother, but I couldn't. And I thought, you know, that pretty well describes every change I've ever experienced in my life. The transition from comfortable familiarity to jarring unfamiliarity. Me pulling back, the future tugging me forward, me resisting. We've been discussing the virtues of humanism, and I just want to say thank you for being the kind of congregation where I can deviate from doctrines and creeds and dogma and consider those philosophies that I think have something to teach us all. Not every church I've ever had would have allowed that, and I appreciate your open-mindedness. So, on to humanism. We've often heard that term denigrated, which is a disservice to such a helpful philosophy. Remember that to be a humanist is to have a high regard for human worth, dignity, and value, and that should never be disparaged. It is consistent with the best of Christianity. One virtue of humanism is its effort to expand our horizons, to broaden our lives, to tug us forward. It asks us not to be citizens of a particular nation, concerned only for that nation, but instead it asks us to be citizens of the universe, or the whole earth, the great earth sandwich. It asks us to carry within us a concern not just for our immediate surroundings, but for the world and everyone in it. I've been thinking about my grandson this week and how small his world is right now. For the first 9 months of his life, he was confined to a womb about the size of a basketball, which kept him safe and secure, allowed him to grow. But now that he's born, his world has grown exponentially. This theme of expansion will hopefully become the pattern of his life. His world will grow larger and larger, his responsibilities greater, his circle of concern will expand. Today, exactly 4 beings inhabit his world. His mom, his dad, Maggie the dog, Olivia the cat. When Joanne sees him on Tuesday, his world will expand by 20%. By 20%. And after that, there's no going back. There's no going back. Every year of his life will bring him more friends, more associations, more experiences. His life will be less insular and more expansive, more spacious. Hopefully. We've all known people who refuse to let their lives expand. I know a family in Danville who has 3 sons in their late 20s to mid 30s. And their friends today are the friends they had as children. They still live at home. They vote and think the way their parents vote and think. And they sleep in the same beds in which they slept as children. They pay nothing in rent. It's as if they're frozen in time, unwilling to let their world expand. If a new or original thought has entered their mind since childhood, I'm not aware of it. It is as if they have never left the womb. They have, in a very real sense, done what doctors call fail to thrive. Fail to thrive. To be a whole and healthy human, we must always be moving the borders of our lives further and further out. As infants, our worlds are necessarily small, but life should change that. Our worlds, our allegiances, our perspectives should grow. This is why political and religious efforts to shrink our world, to confine our world, and confine our areas of concern, this is why those efforts should always be rejected. Those who lift high the torch of yesterday, who venerate what has been and fear what will be, would keep us bound forever in the shackles of the past. We're seeing it now in this nation and in other nations around our world. They are like the Israelites, who in the present day proved too challenging, demanded that Moses return them to their past, to slavery in Egypt. But the humanist, and ideally the Quaker too, says always move forward, always be stretching, always be growing. We will either live in an expanded world, or we will die in a narrowed one. We will either live in an expanded world, or we will die in a narrowed one. We must love our world and all the races in it to the same degree we love our nation and those in it. Until we do that, our world will lurch from one Ukraine to another, the powerful doing what they will while the weak suffer what they must. It is no longer enough for us to care only for our own. No longer enough for presidents and prime ministers to protect and preserve only their own. No longer enough for parents to care only about their own children and no one else's. For grandparents to care only for their own grandchildren but no one else's. Think of history's pattern. Humanity began as individuals who eventually joined in marriage to form families and then clans and tribes. For thousands of years, thousands of years, and in some places still, the family and clan and tribe are the prevailing human structure. It's still with us, it still persists. But elsewhere, those groups formed villages, and villages formed city-states, and city-states merged to form nations. And that is where we are today. We are a collection of nations in this world. But there is one more step necessary if we are to make it. If the experiment of humanity is to succeed, one more step is crucial. The nations of our world must pursue the common goal of universal well-being, universal citizenship. We must become citizens not of a specific nation, acting only in its own interess, but of a worldwide community committed to the well-being and enrichment and betterment of all. One of the more interesting stories in the Bible, in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, is the tale of the Tower of Babel, when all the peoples of the world, still speaking one language, gathered to build a tower to the heavens in hopes of finding first safety from floods, and then finding enlightenments, because if you wanted to be enlightened and in the presence of the divine, you went up high, either to a mountain or, in this story, to the top of a tower that you had built yourself. The story, ends tragically with God purportedly destroying the tower and creating the full range of human languages so that humans would be confused when they spoke with one another and would therefore be unable to cooperate. We're not sure who wrote the story. It's one of the oldest stories in the Bible, and it appears in other cultural traditions too, not just the Bible. But it's a very old story. We don't know who wrote it, but I bet you one thing. I bet that story was most likely written by someone who feared the possibility of human cooperation. Someone who wanted humanity confused, confined, and controlled. Someone unable or unwilling to take that last and most important step of all, the movement from parochial priorities to universal well-being. So away with the tower, away with the cooperation, away with the united effort to learn and grow. I believe with all my heart that Christianity at its best beckons us toward communion and cooperation from the parochial to the universal. In the second chapter of the book of Acts, the presence of the Holy Spirit visits a house in which the first Christians are gathered. You might remember that story. The writer describes a loud wind filling the house, and as the Spirit fills each person spoke their native tongue, and each one present understood what the others were saying. It was the undoing of Babel, illustrating God's longing for human communion and connection. Babel is undone. This is the hope of the humanist, and I think the hope of the Quaker, and why we can say with our humanist brothers and sisters that when any corner of the world suffers, we suffer too. And that when any corner of the world is blessed and enriched, we too benefit. Friend. So I go out to eat lunch just about every day because I start to get lonely right around lunchtime. So I will call up a friend and say, let's meet for lunch. And I invariably go to the same place, at Frank's restaurant there in Danville Square, which is kind of a microcosm of the world. To be at Frank's place in Danville at 12 noon on a weekday, all kinds of people are there. And I was eating with a local person who saw me there and asked if he could join me. We had grown up together, and we began talking, and he has a rather narrow worldview. And so he began his talking and elucidating about the state of the world, and began using lots of other language. And I was thinking how best to address this, and then didn't have to, because a wonderful woman I know in our town happened to be walking by as he was using his othering language, and she stopped and she said, "There is no other. There's only we, and we need to learn that." And I said, "Thank you, friend." And he looked at her as if she were insane. Here is where we are in our world now, friends, that there is far too much othering, far too much casual and heated dismissal of those who think differently, who believe differently, who look different, who are born different. The only solution is to replace the other with the we. To see all of humanity as our brothers and sisters, not enemies to be feared or despised, but our brothers and our sisters, our kinfolk, cousins we haven't met yet. So this week, when you encounter those who would other our world away, remind them, friends, that we are a we. Thank you. Turn and greet, friends.